Hi, everyone. Welcome to this event, a community conversation on taking action for climate justice and racial equity. Today, we're going to be holding a conversation about the intersection of climate justice and racial equity. This is part of Common Impact's signature event, Skills for Cities. And I'm Leila Saad, CEO of Common Impact, and I'm thrilled to be hosting this conversation today. Just yesterday, it was announced that global CO2 and methane emissions increased at record amounts, and the UN reported that the world's current commitments are not enough to prevent a 2.5 Celsius rise in global temperature, that ever important indicator to prevent devastating outcomes. We know this is bad news, and especially for vulnerable communities around the world, and here in the United States for vulnerable communities, especially communities of color. So what do we do about it? We're here today to understand how climate change and racial equity are related and how we can center the voices of those most affected in creating solutions. I hope that conversations like these are not just sobering, but fire us up and inspire us all to take action. With that, we have three inspiring community leaders here today for the conversation, and they each come to this from a different approach in each of their cities. They are Kawanza in Washington, D.C., Paula Brooks in Indianapolis, and Naim Edwards in Detroit. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. And with that, I'd like to turn it to you all to introduce yourselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paula Brooks, and I'm with Hoosier Environmental Council. My elderly dog, Lucy, is greeting you all as well. I manage an environmental justice project that focuses on building the capacity of residents to advocate for themselves in matters that impact their community, including infrastructure, zoning, land use, and transportation.
Thank you so much, Paula, and welcome to the conversation.
Thank you.
Naim.
Yes, hey everybody, my name is Naim Edwards, originally from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I attended Morehouse College and the University of Michigan and studied biology and ecology and evolution. And now I work for Michigan State University in Detroit, developing the first urban agriculture center run by the university.
Thanks, Naim. Great to have you here with us today. Kawanza.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kawanza. I'm a social impact strategist with my company, K-Billy Push, and I focus in education, environmental justice, and closing equity gaps in emerging markets. And I also serve as the National Urban League Young Professionals Advocacy Chair. From New York. I do most of my service in DC. Happy to be here amongst these experts in their fields.
Thank you so much, Kawanza. It's lovely to have all of you here today. Thanks again for joining us. So I'd love to start off by asking you, you all live in different parts of the country. Can you tell us a little bit about the ways that you see climate change disproportionately affecting people of color in your own communities and across the country? Paula, would you go first?
I'm in the Midwest in Indiana, obviously, in Indianapolis, which is the largest city in the state. The state is a small, mainly agricultural based economy. And in terms of disadvantaged communities and the impact of climate change, flooding is a huge issue. Our terrain is, for the most part, flat. But we have very good water resources in the state. But however, given that environmental stewardship is not a key or high priority for our decision makers, there's a battle to maintain our water supplies free of contaminants. For instance, coal ash is a disposal and storage is a huge issue. We also have a huge issue with building and building in our wetlands, as well as and the state has actually lost 80% of its original wetlands. But that's impacted in terms of the gentrification that's happening in the city. So when you have new construction, the fact that the city needs to issue drainage permits, but however, given lack of resources, we like to say the drainage permits are basically rubber stamped, which it means that eventually their neighbors are impacted by flooding and pooling and those types of things. And it costs money when your basement floods and it's damp. Then you start experiencing issues with indoor air quality. So these are some of the examples that I see in my state, how climate change impacts disadvantaged communities.
Thank you, Paula. Really interesting to hear. Kawanza, would you like to tell us how it looks from where you sit?
Sure. As mentioned, I'm based here in DC, and we have some similar issues that other major cities have with quality of water and the quality of air. So we will see, for example, in schools, there has to be consistent lead testing because the pipes, it might be overdue for them to be replaced. But the city is doing the best that they can for now with making sure that folks understand the urgency in getting those reports out to families and community members. We also have, as mentioned, an air quality issue, which the city is now in a commitment to make sure any new construction or building is going to be regulated and has to go through an extensive process to get those certifications. And also there's a stormwater pollution prevention plan that is a key component in some of the construction activities that we're seeing. But the majority of the issues that I see from my seat are involved with the quality of the water and the quality of air, mainly because of new construction and then also because of old infrastructure.
Thanks, Kawanza. And Naim, how are things in Detroit these days?
I'd echo everything Kawanza and Paula have mentioned. I work primarily in agriculture, so I'll speak a little to that. Flooding has certainly been a big issue in Detroit, just as it pertains to overflowing our sewage systems and families of color, communities of color, all communities across the city and across the region have had flooding in homes, flooding in yards, damage to property due to excessive rain. For farmers, of course, if you have a field crop and it floods, that can terminate and kill an entire crop. If you have a flooded farm, it can ruin an entire season's worth of growth potentially. On the flip side, we've also had serious drought. So 2021 was a really rainy summer. 2022 has been like a very dry summer. So we went from what I think was close to 14 inches of rain last year. This year it was closer to 2 or 3 from May to September almost. So that also requires farmers to spend a lot more money on other water sources if they have the ability to purchase water. And of course, if you don't have water and you're dependent on rainwater, then you can also lose a crop from drought. Similarly, for folks who don't farm, if you have heating or cooling cost, you will pay more to heat your home potentially earlier in the season and through the winter, and pay more to cool your home as early as May. We've had warm days. It was close to 80 yesterday here in Detroit, and it's almost the end of October. So cost through utilities, cost to growers, and cost to property from excessive precipitation. And then we also kind of tied it into fossil fuel burning. There is a pretty high asthma rate here in Detroit, particularly in children. So the burning of fossil fuels, we have a petroleum refinery here in the city. that adds a lot of not only carbon dioxide, but other toxins to the air, which can be harmful to people's lungs.
Thank you so much. It's really helpful to hear about the intersections of all of these things happening at once too. Paula, let me start with you for the next question. What do you think are the most important priorities to deal with the climate change and its impact on communities of color right now? And what are you and your organization doing to help address these issues?
Well, I think one of the our most pressing tasks is to prepare the residents for the impacts of climate change. For instance, as Naim mentioned, the increase in utility costs. Clean water is expensive. Providing clean water is just not cheap, and it's going to become more expensive. Policy-wise, we're an advocacy organization. So policy-wise, we advocate for instance, for the revolving loan funds for drinking water and wastewater, that communities of disadvantaged communities are targeted for loan forgiveness, for instance. We're also advocating for a wider use of social vulnerability measures rather than median household income, given the change in populations and communities that can mask a great need, just given the size of the census tracts. We're also working on a local level to strengthen the residents' capacity to challenge zoning petitions with an eye towards climate change. So for instance, communities that maybe historically have been overburdened by environmental hazards, we're fighting and helping residents to ensure that more environmental hazards are not coming into their communities. Lulu are a huge issue, and it's really determined on the wealth of the community whether or not you get a wastewater facility a mile from your house versus having a playground for your children to play. So those are two examples of what we're doing currently to assist residents in their ability to adjust to change.
And Naim, you mentioned quite a number of the potential concerns at the moment, but you work in agriculture. Tell us a little bit about the kind of work that you're doing in this front.
So with Michigan State University, we have begun, this is our 4th year of operations. We have leased a 3.5 acre property from the city of Detroit that was formerly a public school. And we've been redeveloping that into this urban agriculture center, which is a space where we're conducting research as well as offering programs, not just related to agricultural production and the food system, but also the wide breadth of extension or cooperative extension programs. Some of you may be familiar with. Every state has at least one land grant institution, and then the cooperative extension branch of every land grant institution operates to leverage university expertise and knowledge and make it more available to communities across the country and every county of every state. So we offer nutrition classes, we've had robotics classes, yoga, mental health, home ownership, small business development. But I primarily focus on developing urban agriculture research projects as well as managing production here at our site. So in the last 2 years, we've been converting most of our landscape to fruit and nut crop production with the understanding that fruits and nuts are often a super limited resource as it pertains to food. A lot of people tend to put emphasis on meat and vegetables, which are both valuable and important, but many studies show that when individuals and populations eat more fruits and nuts, it reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease, the likelihood of having diabetes. Fruits and nuts can improve cognitive function, physical health, and then of course, being involved and actively caring for those plants also adds physical activity and community engagement and social engagement in ways that simply going to a store and purchasing those foods does not. And fruit and nut crops also tend to be woody plants, and woody plants have a higher capacity than annual crops being your tomatoes, your peppers, your potatoes. Fruit and nut crops have a greater capacity of sequestering carbon dioxide and pulling that out of the air and putting it into their root systems, their trunks, their branches, their leaves, and then permanently continuing to grow over time throughout the life of the plant. So there's also a carbon sequestration capacity that annual production doesn't necessarily have that we get from growing that. Yeah.
That's really interesting to hear. I didn't know about a lot of this, and it's a very full circle process. Thanks for sharing that. Kawanza, I wanted to give you a chance to jump in too, if you'd like to.
Yeah, so I think for the answer to this question for me would be Urban League. I can speak briefly about what Urban League is doing there. I'm now having conversations as to, we were talking on our prep call about Justice 40, but we're talking mainly about how do you not only prepare communities for what's happening and the impact of climate change, especially extreme weather. How do we prepare the workforce to engage in making sure that Black and Brown and the people most impacted by climate change are also able to take advantages of some of the new job opportunities to create solutions in their community, whether that's through employment, whether that's through business development. So from my understanding, that's a lot of what our affiliate, our national organization is doing. What we are doing on the young professional level is on the ground, state by state, city by city, where we do have chapters, having conversations with community members to see how climate change is impacting them. When we look at what's been happening in Texas, Texas is not used to ice storms and flooding, so just having conversations with community members as to trying to get solutions and also trying to see where some of the dollars for infrastructure has gone and will be going moving forward to help weatherize and prepare people for those situations. So that's how we're interacting with climate change through our organization.
Thank you, Kawanza. These are such interesting and different ways of approaching the problem. I'd love to ask all of you to help us to think through ways that we all, especially those of us who are on the call, who are in the corporate sector, to be involved and participate in activities around climate change. But before we get to that question, I just wanted to take a step back. There are a variety of terms to describe this work, and I'd love to hear if you all have input on what the differences are between those and why sometimes we use one versus the other. So I'm thinking of climate action versus climate justice versus environmental justice, each having sort of their own meanings. And I'd love to know if you all could help us to unpack those terms and their meanings and to tell us why it's important to be clear about the definitions we're using and what terms do you all use in your daily work and why. And I open this to any of you that'd like to respond.
I'll start with environmental justice. Environmental justice, the idea is that it's a human right to live in a clean, safe, and healthy environment. And most people can understand that. Clean water, clean soils, access to education, healthcare, and environmental justice also, the framework, it encompasses every aspect of life. So, I mentioned education. A lot of times people don't think about environmental justice in the education space, but it is because, again, the core idea or the core tenet is a human right to live in a clean, healthy, and safe environment. And maybe Kawanza or Naim discuss climate justice and climate action.
I'm actually going to say I also use environmental justice because of the work that I do in particular, not only motivating and inspiring and activating young professionals across the country, some of the work that I briefly was able to do with Black Millennials for Flint, and some work that I've been doing since watching my first episode of Captain Planet as a kid, is understanding that there have been historical and systemic circumstances or impacts to communities that are Black, brown, marginalized, fall lower on social stratification, that have been put in positions, yes, Captain Plain, that have been put in positions where they are they're impacted higher by climate change. And some of these circumstances have been man-made. So if you are in a community where they are making guns down the block from your house, if you're having excessive rain and they're not properly following the rainwater, or how they're how they're cleaning up the waste, not only are you now impacted by whatever's happening because of man-made environmental issues, you're also now living in a community that's down the block where these chemicals and these things are impacting how you live. So it's like, how do we then course correct, transform people's ideas as to what safety looks like, as environmental protections are safety for community folks as well, and then get some restoration around that. So to me, it's all civil rights, it's all justice, and it's all connected. So I think some of the work and the importance of what we do at the Urban League is to really have folks who don't necessarily connect with the term green or climate change or these things understand, as Paula put it, it is your right to be able to breathe clean, fresh air. It is your right to turn on your tap water and like water come out and it's clean, and it's drinkable, it's usable. It is your right to work in an environment that is following guidelines or understands they're important to the planet as well. So yeah, I go with justice as well.
Yes, I'll chime in. I was thinking that there's only one kind of justice, but there are different ways that people work towards achieving it. So I generally try to avoid compartmentalizing like, oh, there's environmental justice, racial justice, social justice, economic justice. And it's like, if you're creating equity and trying to create a world where all humans can live like dignified, meaningful lives, then that's justice work. But if you know that you can't do that work without having these other things in mind, air quality, water quality, poverty, gender roles, etc. And I was thinking, I generally don't use the term food justice, but we actually, I guess, in Detroit and in a lot of agricultural circles, we use the term food sovereignty. And that is an effort to work towards empowering people or helping people recognize the power that they have in their food system. So in order to be able to grow food and access food in a way that you want to access it, you have to live in a community and in a world that is mindful of how water is distributed, how temperatures affect what you can grow, how soil quality is affected by lead and arsenic and other chemicals falling out of the air, how industry has impacted people's ability to have jobs, to be able to have transportation. So just recognizing that it's all connected and structured. And I think all justice, more or less, is simply recognizing that life isn't fair for a huge portion of the human population. And then when you say climate justice, then you would be taking a role or a position of saying, I want to work towards building awareness around how my life and your life and larger entities' lives and operations can reduce, presumably, their fossil fuel footprint, their carbon footprint, and participate in practices that are actually enhancing, rebuilding, restoring the ecosystem and the planet.
Thank you, Paula.
And I just would like to add that action means that you're actually doing something, correct? So you can have environmental action, you can have food action, climate action, but justice, that's the goal. It's a goal.
Thank you so much. There is such a theme here of the interconnectedness of the ideas, the idea that there's no justice but justice, except for the idea of justice and justice for all. I really appreciate this, and I think it's really meaningful to those of us who are here on the call today, trying to figure out how to act toward the goal of justice. So let me turn to that conversation, which is really for us here at Common Impact. The thing that we do is we bring corporate employees together to help support nonprofit organizations. And we've tried to focus a lot recently. We did a great project recently with Nielsen, for example, to support organizations who are focused on climate action, on climate justice, and on environmental justice, to cover all of the areas. And I'd like to know what you all think companies should be doing as well to support the communities, the nonprofits and the organizations and the people who are working toward these goals.
I could just add programs such as this program where corporate entities donate resources is important, but I would like to see more cooperation or interaction between some of the smaller frontline on the ground organizations. Maybe it's just one or two persons that's really the driving force of this organization, but they do the work. And these organizations struggle for funding. You know, everyone, regardless if you're in this as a from your heart as a lifetime commitment, you still need to eat. You know, you still need some recreation at some time, some downtime. And I just would like to see more cooperation from corporate entities with smaller grassroots organizations, and not that there's strings attached to the funds as well. So I really want to emphasize that this funding, maybe it's $1,000, maybe it's $5,000, that is given without strings, because that holds back a lot of the work as well.
I echo what Paula said. I think it's really important to get with communities and leaders who have been working towards solutions for decades and who really just need the funds, and also maybe even a platform to really share what's working and to get feedback on what's not working. I firmly believe that the solutions are with the community, and I think right now is an opportunity for corporations not only to give freely, but also to look at what sustainability looks like when it comes to resources. So I love the work that you all are doing. When I'm working with corporations, they might want to do a giving day or a sharing day or some service day. But what does it look like to pledge X amount of hours to this small grassroots, I don't even like that term, but this small frontline organization? What does it look like to pledge X amount of dollars over the term of this community garden or this whatever the project is? What does that look like? And I think another thing, I see large organizations give millions of dollars to large and mid-sized community partners, but don't necessarily but don't necessarily do the transformational work within the company to kind of like match that energy. So it's one thing for you to say, you know what, we are going to give $1 million to X, Y, and Z organization. It's another thing for you to then, in your plan, to decide to do something different with the waste, to be willing to shift some of your your company goals to make sure that you are using less energy and simple things like that. So I think it would be great to see folks not only give some unrestricted funding, create some sustainability plans on what this service and what this funding look like, but also do the internal work so you're matching, the missions of the organizations that you're looking to support.
Thank you, Kawanza. Naim?
Yeah, I was thinking that organizations, corporations, large institutions really need to kind of take a step back whenever time permits, although time seems to never permit itself to do that, and really reflect and examine how does the organization, the corporation operate internally, and then how does it operate externally? Sometimes there's a lot of low-lying fruit for just the morale of the employees within the organization, how they get to work, how they use energy, how they use resources, printing papers, sending emails, traveling a lot, et cetera. And then the organization can make commitments or come up with a plan for how can we internally do things to reduce our impact. And then on the outside, you say, if we're a profitable corporation, then how can we use a portion of our profits to support entities that are doing the work that either we wish we could do or we simply want to support. And I really think that there's a local component that I haven't heard yet. So I noticed someone said an NPO could be housed within a corporation. So certainly localizing like what are the closest things to us that we can support, that we can lift up, that we can provide stability to and enhance. And how can we act locally and not necessarily be concerned, although it's important to be concerned at a regional and global level, say, what are the issues affecting our city, our district, our town, our people, the people who live closest to us, including the people within our own organization, from the CEO, the founder, the owner, all the way down to custodians potentially, and really just ask, like, what are we doing that supports and makes their lives better? And what are we doing that might be compromising, health, future generations, et cetera? So, I think, I don't know, sometimes organizations are run by boards. Of course, if they're private or public or whatever, there's a lot of factors that affect decision making. But I would just encourage all decision makers at whatever level you're at to use the power and agency you have to start to sit down and actually think through those processes.
Thank you. I'd love to turn to a conversation that's close to my heart. I have 3 daughters, and I consider the next generation to be a place that I put a lot of hope into. I don't know about all of you. And I think that's true if you're, these young people are coming into corporations, they're coming into becoming community leaders and activists in their own right. I think they're more concerned than ever about climate change because they're growing up with this. There's also this renewed, powerful interest in caring about racial justice, racial equity. What do you think we can all do, either as their peers, as their elders, to support them and to help fuel that excitement, passion, and that movement? Kawanza, would you like to start?
Sure. I actually made a post about this yesterday on Twitter and Facebook and all the things. I was on a call and I was the youngest person in the room, and they called me the youth. I am 36 years old, and I thought it was irresponsible. So I said, okay, let's take a look around the room. If you're referring to me as youth, we have a major problem here. So I think what we can do is to, one, lift our voices up, recognize who's not in this space, and whether it's creating a leadership development program or however people like to do it, get young folks in the room. They're brilliant and have patience, because I know between Gen X, Millennials, Z, and even Alpha coming up, we all have very different work styles, but really create space from like the inception of the idea to the execution to have them involved. Just new, fresh ideas. And then I think also just the energy. A lot of us are burned out and hitting a wall quite frequently. I think it's not even that they're the leader of tomorrow. They're literally the leaders of today. There's so much going on. I work with a young group we do theater, social issues through theater, and just spending 30 minutes with them, I knew we were going to be fine, so they're brilliant. So I think listen to them, have patience, create space. When you look around the room and you see that, there's not anyone who is younger than you in the room, even if you are on this call and you're like 23, whatever, let's make sure that young folks are at those tables. And I think also for folks who have experience and the energy, mentor, teach, those things are key.
Thank you, Kawanza. I want to turn next to the question that I hope we'll end on, which is what's giving us some hope in all of this. But first, Naim or Paula, did you want to have a comment about what we do and how we support the next generation?
Yeah, I would just say we have to do the hard stuff, unfortunately. And the hard stuff is recognizing everything we do wrong. And then not only recognizing it, but actually recognizing what we can do right. So I was thinking about values, and a lot of us value justice. A lot of us value making the world a better place, but some of us, or a lot of us, value money. And when you choose to climb the social ladder and the economic ladder, that often comes with compromising, like, well, if I want the big house with 5 televisions and 2 refrigerators and 2 cars and, a ton of land and all these things, and I'm going to drive to work, I'm now compromising the value for these other bigger things to make sure that I have economic success. And I think Gen Zers, in a lot of ways, millennials and other older folks to a lesser degree, have gotten to a point where they're not necessarily embracing those values as much as they've historically been embraced, but simply saying, I think we always encourage people to go to college, get a job and make money or start their own business. And the pursuit is always money, and recognizing that there are ways to live very happily and very well without pursuing tons of wealth. And tons of wealth doesn't necessarily guarantee anything besides a lot of exploitation and extraction from the earth. So kind of getting to a place where we're not willing to let profit and the gain of more money compromise our commitment to one another, to justice, and to protecting the environment.
Well, I work with a lot of Gen Zs and millennials, and I'm a Gen X myself, and I just find it kind of interesting. From my point, I've lived that age. I've been that age. And life is a continuum. There's a trend. You just really want that trend to be an upward trend. And to kind of support what Naim is saying, previously, the push has always been to get that corner office, make as much money as you can make. And that's even when I talk to millennials, especially, that still seems to be the goal, is that I'm gonna make money, I'm gonna live large. I find that not really being able to connect politically with our political leaders is of concern for me, because in my space, when I was younger, the civil rights warriors were our heroes, right? Younger people don't necessarily have that type of role models to look forward to. So I don't really know what that answer is, but I'm buoyed, as everyone else is, about the 20-year-olds, the teenagers, and that idealism. So I think our responsibility needs to be not to kill that idealism in younger people, to nurture that spirit. I think that that's really what we need to do.
Thank you, Paula. As a mother of three, I agree completely. And you've given us all a little bit of something to feel good about and to hope for. What's one more thing you might add that you think gives us all some hope for the future, for our communities and our ability to support one another?
That life is precious, all forms of life, and that each person has a purpose, and that we just need to take the time out to respect that purpose. We may not like it, but I think we need to respect it.
I think similar to what Paul said, we all have our own genius. I think find your place in the movement. I think, and also take breaks. Take breaks. Go find some work. Connect with nature. Like, that's real life. Like, real life is the flock of birds flying above you, or like the water crashing on the shore. So I think if we continue to recognize what's real about living, we'll be fine. And I think that that's actually one of my motivating factors. How do we get to have this beautiful world be something that folks can tap into and remember that we are alive, and find your place in the movement, whatever that is. Mm-hmm.
In the same vein, I say, as capable as we are of recognizing the destruction and all the awful things that humans do, we are just as capable at recognizing our ability to create life, restore life, save life, replant forest, purify water systems, and innovate and create new ways of producing energy, food, etc. So recognizing that we have all the tools that are needed right now. It's simply a question of changing behavior and changing habits.
Thank you, Naim. Thank you, Kawanza. Thank you, Paula. You each have brought your own special voice to this conversation, and we greatly appreciate it. We appreciate the words of hope, and we appreciate the words of wisdom that you shared with us. It was so interesting to learn about each of you and the work that you're doing in your communities. Thank you once again, and thanks to all of our participants for listening today. We'll see you all at the next event.